Okay, welcome back to the Think Education podcast. Today, little strange one for all three of us involved. Chris Hill, joined as ever by Judith Lammy, but our guest today is a repeat guest. Technically, right, Judith? We've recorded one already with our guest. It's just because the tech failed. The three of us are the only people that actually are aware that it happened. But so technically, it's nice to welcome back our guest, even if not actually publicly. So I'll hand to Judith for the formal professional invitation and opening. But just to say, it's nice to be back several months later, having a new conversation with our guest.
Yeah, great to be back.
Okay. Great. Well, welcome very much, Rachelle. It's lovely that you've joined us again, and it's lovely that we are now sharing our conversation with a few more people instead of just keeping it to the three of us. I'll just give a brief. Well, I'm going to give a very brief introduction, because if I gave full juice to what Rachelle has done in the past, we'd still be here by the middle of next week, because she's done a lot. You've crammed a lot in there, Rachelle. But Dr. Rachelle Viader Knowles is Head of International for the Faculty of Arts and Humanities at Manchester Metropolitan University. Obviously, Rachelle and I have known each other for some time. And there you lead the strategic development of global engagement, including the faculty's portfolio of international partnerships, which, given, as we know, the massive amount that Manchester Met do. You only have to follow you on LinkedIn, Rachelle, to know that even for that little bit there, the huge amount that takes place. But also for those of us that know the university well, we know that there's a massive amount there, even with the current role that you've got now. But particularly interestingly, I think, and something we'll come back to, obviously as the podcast goes on, Rachelle's really been a pioneer of COIL, or collaborative online international learning, in the creative arts in particular, since the early 2000s. And her current interest is in translocal dialogues, and we will definitely come back to that, Rachelle, so you can explain to us a little bit more about that and what that means. But really, the interesting thing about that in particular is it combines your background, as an artist and a creative researcher, with your experience in educational leadership and in international higher education. So, for us, it's a really interesting splicing of those and bringing those together. You've got a worldwide profile. Literally, you've covered pretty much every continent, I think. You've lived in Canada for 20 years, and you can tell us a little bit about that, later on. And you grew up. Now, you see, now I've retired from Swansea University. It would have been ideal when we had our previous conversation, because usually I always would manage to crowbar in a Welsh connection. But you grew up in Cardiff. At Swansea. We forgive you for Cardiff. We're all friends together over the border. We were. But anyway, there's still, I can't help it. I've still got that Welsh link. You grew up in Cardiff, but even more fascinating for myself, given my own links as well. And I remember when we first discovered this, the conversations we had, but you grew up in Cardiff in a Mauritian family, so there's a real strong Mauritius link there as well. So Rachelle, we're just delighted that you can join us today. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing now at Manchester Met, for us to spend some time talking, I think, about this whole area around translocal dialogues and all of the work that you've done, that you really have been and are sector leading in this area. It is something that, and I do not use this word lightly, everybody that knows me knows I get wound up with this word that people use incorrectly, but you are truly unique in this, in that you have got something here that we just haven't encountered before, how you brought these things together. So, as an academic, as a researcher, the change and the difference and what you've contributed to our sector in terms of, groundbreaking research within that area has just been astonishing. So it'd be great to hear about that a little bit later on. But maybe, Rachelle, just then over to you, maybe a little bit of a potted history of what brought you up. You are in now at Manchester Met. So over to you and welcome.
Well, thank you, Judith, and thanks, Chris. It's great to be back with you, and as you say, great to have an audience with us this time. I mean, golly gosh, that was quite an introduction, and where to start? So, yeah, I did my. I mean, I have more South Wales connections if you want to know about them. I did my.
Keep them coming. Keep them coming.
Well, I did my undergraduate degree in Newport. Just to name another city, and I have been an external examiner in Swansea, so I think I've pretty much ticked off South Wales at least. Yeah, so my undergraduate education was also extremely interesting. I did the very unique interactive arts degree, which anybody from a sort of art and technology background might have heard of. Roy Ascott, who's quite a visionary in that area, and he initiated this pretty wacky undergraduate degree sort of in the countryside in Cullion outside of Newport. So that really set the scene for experimental thinking and interdisciplinarity and all the things that I think have been quite the strands that I've continued with, and also very much thinking about collaboration. A lot of what I've done is working with other people. I'm definitely not a lone wolf. I like working in teams on collaborative projects, and that dialogue, that spirit of dialogue and collaboration has really been embedded in so much of what I've done. So those are some of the starting points, and then I ended up in Canada to do my master's degree at the University of Windsor, and that was great, and that really sort of set me off on a different kind of international journey around career-wise, I suppose. Being based in Canada, you'd sort of think that there's a lot of similarities, and of course you go anywhere and there's a huge amount of difference. And I became interested in those kinds of cultural conversations between different places, and off it all went from there.
So how did you decide to go to Canada then, Rachelle? I mean, actually, our last book, as you know, was about journeys. It was about international journeys. It was about how do we begin. It was very difficult for me not to interject when you were talking about all of the wacky and interesting and innovative things that happened to you around Newport. Now, I Wales, and I've been to Newport many times, mostly the train station, going through it. I have to admit, I wouldn't have expected that those kind of things would happen right on Newport's doorstep. But there you go. Don't be writing into me saying that I'm being mean about Newport. But but isn't it wonderful to hear that there's all of those things? But how then did you? So you're loafing around Cardiff and Newport one minute, and then the next moment you're over to Canada. How did you decide to do that? And what I mean, that must have started to take you on that. I mean, you were obviously from an international background. Yeah. Anyway, really, given your Mauritian roots, but how did that happen?
Yeah, and actually, when my mother and her family had emigrated to the UK in the 60s from Mauritius, former British colony. So I'm very much a person whose life was formed by colonialism and those kinds of various tensions and dimensions. They emigrated to the UK, and then actually when I was 16, my mother moved back to Mauritius. So for many decades after that, I was going back and forth to Mauritius to see my mum. So I already had that real sense of a big world out there, and wanting to really have that global perspective as part of the framework of the way I engage with my life, but also my career. How I ended up in Canada, I think it's interesting because it is very much through the power of networks. woman who ended up being my supervisor, who I went to the University of Windsor to study with for my MFA, was Professor Sylvie Bélanger, who in Canadian terms was also a real pioneer of art and technology. And through her global networks, she was connected with a lot of different artists in Europe. She used to come and work in a studio in the Netherlands every summer and knew a lot of European people. And through those set of connections, she knew somebody that was one of my tutors in Newport, and yes, that's how we sort of found each other. So I applied to do my master's degree with her, and ended up in Windsor, Ontario, which is a fascinating city in southern Canada, tucked underneath Detroit, so a little bit of Canada that is south of the USA for the geography buffs out there. And yeah, that Windsor-Detroit area, if you're interested in this concept of translocal dialogues, I mean, there's a really interesting little part of the world, because they're sort of twin cities, you know, just with a small river between them, but very, very different places, obviously connected by the Ambassador Bridge. And I believe there's a new bridge now. So I spent a very interesting few years there. That was the start of my professional life. Started having exhibitions, and then eventually after that, well, I think the other thing to say maybe is that, you know, very much a thing within the Canadian system at that time. You do a master's degree, you end up becoming a teaching assistant. So I was a GTA through the whole of my master's degree. So even at that point, I was very, it was a real entry point into the academic profession. So it was very clear to me from the get-go that my career interests were very much about the creative subject area that I was working with, but equally about academia, and working in universities is absolutely fascinating places to base yourself.
I'll let Chris and Chris go, because it's not just, you know, you and I having a chat, so you have to dive in, Chris. But one, just the point that you just made then, and I hadn't realised that. So do all students who are master's students then in Canada are GTAs as well? Is that just like a standard, or was it then? It might be different.
I was in a really small master. Yeah, I was in a tiny master's program that only had 4 people in it, and at that time, I mean, maybe things have changed now. Certainly, you know, teaching assistantships were an available thing, and I was very fortunate to have a teaching assistantship the whole way through my master's degree, which not only helped, helped me to afford to be there, but it brings you into a different sense of self as a student doing a master's degree, that you're already, have your first step on the ladder of your academic profession, and it really opens the door for you and gives you a sense about whether you want to do it or not. It's not for everybody,
that's just
clearly.
What I was thinking. I mean, even if it doesn't happen in places now, or it didn't happen for everybody then, it is a really good example, isn't it, of you're doing something for a variety of reasons, or there's that opportunity that's there. It's helping financially, but more than anything, actually, within a safe environment, it's enabling you to experiment, isn't it, in a way,
Exactly.
And see if that is something in terms of a career that, I mean, obviously you do things to the best of your ability when you're doing them anyway. It's not that you don't, but you might do something, might you, and then think, you know what, I really love this. This is something that I really want to continue doing. I mean, it's one of those things, isn't it, where you think what a great opportunity that will be for any student at any point in any course to be able to have that kind of experience.
Yeah, and of course, for those of us, involved in international student recruitment, I mean, of course, the question always asked first is around the money and whether there's financial support and all of those kinds of questions. And, I was that international student, way back when in the early 90s. And of course, it wouldn't have been possible for me unless that funding package was available.
I mean, mine was a little bit later. I was a doctoral student, but I had the same kind of opportunities to be a teaching whatever. And that, I think that set me on my career path as well. I mean, obviously your careers evolve a little bit and you move, etc. But I mean, that sort of link to academia, absolutely. and even as a home student, you know, on a partial studentship, the financial support obviously is a benefit, right? It's not not to be sneered at. Can I ask you a question? Because something you just mentioned now, and then back to the way Judith introduced you, this term creative researcher. I'm not actually sure I've heard that before, and I really like that, because I'm wondering, is it researcher in creative fields, or is this not something we should be able to apply kind of more broadly, that research in itself should be an act of creation, right? Rather than maybe not art, but because I'm sure that a lot of what I do would not be remotely anywhere near art. But yeah, I'd like that term. I mean, is that something from within your language study? Is that where that emanates from?
I mean, there is a whole body of literature out there, Chris, around practice-based research, and you know, it's a different kind of, it's a methodology of how you can work through practice, and how knowledge, meaning making can be created through practice rather than solely through words. I did my PhD as a practice-led PhD rather than practice-based, but yeah, these different kinds of methodologies have produced a lot of very interesting writing and thinking over the last few decades. In the UK, that was really forged, I think, through practice-based PhDs, being able to do your PhD in that kind of way, so that some of the outcome would be in a different kind of form, accompanied by a written text. In Canada, for example, it came about in quite a slightly different sort of way in terms of the discourse, which was really about a funding stream, when SSHRC started offering the opportunity to apply for funding to support what they call in Canada research creation. So yeah, but I do think it is something that has really, you know, informed other disciplinary areas. Now it's not just the creative arts. Certainly I see that across many different disciplines, you know, sociology, education, you know, where there are all of these different kinds of more active, you know, different kinds of ways of working beyond traditional methods and methodologies of research.
Yeah, I mean, I don't teach it anymore, but one of the courses I used to teach in my old university here in Dubai was looking at knowledge creation and ownership of knowledge, and how that kind of evolves. And one of the examples that I would use is a picture which I actually have a copy of, which I bought in Vancouver, and it's a First Nation painting. And it's what I guess we in the West would call a totem pole, right? It's a visualization of a family's history, and that's a doctoral thesis.
Yeah.
You know, it was submitted as such and passed as such, and you think, well, why not? You know, why can't knowledge be represented in different ways? And certainly those of us that have, you know, read and written and supervised and examined PhD theses, there have got to be other ways of doing it that are more interesting, right? So yeah, all for the variety of that. And I had an example which a colleague of mine from New Zealand told me years ago, and she said that when you are, as a Maori, if you want to do a PhD, before you go to the university to write your proposal or to apply for a post, you have to go back to your village elders and your community and explain to them how what you are doing will benefit society. Because obviously you don't own the knowledge. The knowledge is traced back through generations. And I mean, I would not really have been able to explain how my PhD could possibly have benefited anybody other than getting me a doctoral title. And I think it's an interesting way of looking at, you know, the value of research, particularly sort of to link to some of the other issues that your expertise, right, which is the internationalization, collaboration, and indeed, you know, transnational dialogue. We've talked in the past on podcasts with somebody else from Wales about connecting research and internationalization, connecting research and teaching and learning, and looking at community-based engagement through an understanding of context and through problem solving, rather than, to go back to what you said before, the colonial view of educational expansion. Is this, do you, I guess the question, because I just rambled, is to what extent are you able to do this within your kind of professional internationalization work? Like how much can it inform it, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, some of the things you're touching on have been incredibly influential to me. I mean, one of the absolute privileges of the 12 years I spent in Regina, Saskatchewan, in the prairies region of Canada, it is having had the opportunity to get to know so many Indigenous artists and colleagues, to be exposed to Indigenous methodologies. And working at the University of Regina, I was on the same campus as First Nations University of Canada. It was an Indigenous university with some, extraordinary colleagues there. Who I'm still in touch with. So I've worked in a collaboration for a while with Judy Anderson, who is now a professor at the University of Calgary in Alberta, and we're actually going to be doing a keynote together later this year at the University of Stockholm for a Canadian Studies conference. We worked together, I mean, just by way of an example, on a project where she taught me how to do Indigenous beading. And I taught her around some aspects of video editing, and we made a project together where we each produced a QR code in black and white beads. And when you link to those QR codes, it brought up two sides of a conversation on video online that talked between somebody of Indigenous heritage and somebody of white settler heritage, talking about their understandings of technology and the influences of technology in their lives. So it was a very, very interesting project. And at that time, I was head of visual arts at the University of Regina. She was head of visual arts at First Nations University of Canada. And this was part of a bridging project that we were doing to bring our two teams closer together and to have an exhibition together. So, I mean, it's an example in a way of the way in which I've produced projects that sit at that edge of art and technology that is to do with dialogue and bridging in this translocal way between different perspectives, different cultural backgrounds, or different geographies in some cases, but also an example of how, I've really learned so much from the Indigenous colleagues that I met there. And that idea of Indigenous methodologies is absolutely fascinating. And the thinking that has been brought through that around ethics and, ensuring that when you're undertaking research activities, that the research subjects who are part of your research, that there is direct benefit for them. That there is that ethical responsibility to the people that you're working with and that you're producing outcomes that will help, that will do something, that feeds back into communities. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, Chris, because it is something that has been extremely influential and I think is incredibly important.
But I think also on that note, it's not always something that we recognise well enough at universities, is it? Either in terms of our students or our staff. It's going back to what you were just talking about, Chris, in terms of the size and shape, literally, of a PhD. Somebody at some point decided that it was that it needed to be 70,000 words, not 60, not 80, not 50, not 20, not 190. Somebody decided that it needed to fit into a certain frame. Somebody decided that, and we've stuck to that by and large, and I'm not saying, well, as somebody like you, like you, Chris, as somebody who themselves have still got mine sitting in the back room sitting, and I'm very proud of it. I really worked hard at it. I'm not saying I didn't. I do think there was impact there, yada yada yada. But there is just so much more that we can do, isn't there? There's so much more that's important, that's influenced, and how therefore, there are different ways in which we can measure what we're doing ourselves academically, but then what that impact is And sometimes, therefore, just being able to evidence that impact. And in many ways, I would have thought, actually, what you just described, Rachelle, is much easier is the wrong word, but you're going to, I think you know what I mean. You can see the evidence of the kind of impact that you've said, much more readily than you can very often something that somebody's going to do and is going to sit there on a shelf. And actually, then once you start to describe what your impact is, it might be there, but you've got it embedded within the study itself, haven't you? So I think there's something really that we can learn in so many ways here from this whole idea of what you're putting forward for us in terms of either the creative research or then leading into what it happens with regard to a translocal dialogue, but also what really struck me with.
No, I was just going to say that. So, these sets of ideas around translocal dialogues were what my doctorate were all about. And I think in the UK that there is now a really rich tradition of practice-based research. And you certainly, that there's now, decades of examples of practice-based research doctorates. I mean, my PhD, which through the University of Plymouth, it was practice led, so it was a 5-chapter PhD. There is a document, it's sat on the desk there like everyone has it, gathering dust, but 3 of those chapters were anchored with a large piece of practice, and so it ended up being 50,000 words. So that's plus 3 very comprehensive pieces of work that were then reflected on, and the knowledge was then teased out and critically engaged with through the written part of it. So there's a lot of examples of this way of working now, and it's very exciting.
Yeah, just finally, the example you were giving as well in terms of your QR code, again, just a wonderful example for somebody who absolutely isn't an artist in any shape or form myself, but to be able to have something therefore that you're just connecting on all different levels, aren't you? You're connecting visually, you're connecting physically, you're connecting in terms of spoken language, you're connecting in terms of written language. It's like all different ways in which you're connecting in and speaking to people, but not speaking in the narrow term, speaking in the widest possible term that you can have.
Yes, and I think another term in there is this idea of interactivity. I mean, that particular piece that I was talking about there, the idea is that obviously what you watch on these screens is a video dialogue, and you see these 2 QR codes on the wall, but it takes 2 to tango in this piece. You need 2 people looking at the artwork. They both need to have a device, whether it's an iPad or a phone or whatever, and they scan the QR code, and then they have to do it at the same time, and they have to coordinate this so that they can then watch the video, because it's playing out across 2 different screens. One side of the conversation is on one, the other side of the conversation is the other. So it's about a really activated engagement with the artwork, and that's really what it's about. It's about bringing people together and having those interactions.
Those kind of themes are always things that just run through everything, don't they? I mean, indeed, when Chris and I were just talking, earlier on this week about the situation we have at present, that theme of sort of communication, of interaction, of just that kind of way in which we have those dialogues is just vital for everything, isn't it? Be it through our own areas in terms of education, but just through life, full stop.
Absolutely. And I mean, I came to a lot of these ideas and ways of working through this kind of creative practice, but I have found it to be extremely applicable to internationalization of the curriculum, internationalization at home. So that's where I bring this in now, and have really sort of, pivoted this thinking into leadership around an internationalized global experience for students. So that's certainly what we've been doing in arts and humanities and across Manchester Met is really using these ways of working to bring that commitment to global education for all students. We know that physical mobility experiences for students are, absolute gold standard in how to bring global citizenship thinking and confidence and all those kinds of things that come from being able to go overseas and be changed by those experiences. But we also know that very few students, a small percentage, are ever going to be able to have that. So what about the rest of them? And so, that this is where COIL has come in for me, and, other forms of virtual mobility. But certainly COIL, I'm just so passionate about. And, I work with a fantastic team of academics at Manchester Met who are really building this agenda within their individual schools and doing some absolutely incredible projects, bridging into, many of our different partner universities, but, also through their own research and personal networks. And producing extraordinary projects out of that are really meaningful for students, and they get a huge amount out of it. I suppose the development of that, for me, sort of the next step is thinking about TNE and how there might be a bit of a pivot there. What if instead of transnational education, we start thinking about translocal education and think about that local to local connectivity that also connects in to local communities. So connecting classrooms together across geographies, but also then connecting classrooms with communities and sort of building those roots into specificities of places. So that's where we're sort of going. And a shout out to our funders. Thank you, British Council. We just received a Going Global Partnership grant, and so we're going to be developing a couple of very interesting COIL projects with our partner, the British University in Egypt. And from that, hopefully building some toolkits and developing some insights that we can share across the sector.
And writing a chapter.
Yes.
We'll be working on, because that would just be wonderful, because I think, this is something that we've talked about as well, haven't we? But that next step of bringing together now what's happening within the international higher education space, what's happening within the TNE space, and learning from the developments within translocal dialogues. I think, bringing those together to see the directions in which these can take, and using, as you say, I'm sure there'll be some really interesting projects as well that come out of the British University in Egypt. That would be fascinating to hear too. I think something else, and I know Chris wants to come in, but I think something else also that would be interesting to learn from you a little bit as well is about because we've heard about all the great stuff, of which there's loads of great stuff, we know that there is, but there also must be some challenges with this as well. So it'd be interesting to hear a little bit about what some of those challenges are too.
I mean, I think we can think about these challenges in so many different sorts of ways. I think that what we're trying to do at Manchester Met is really grow this strategy around an internationalised curriculum from the ground up. So I think the challenge there is always, if you try and apply strategies from the top down, from the academic side, it's always, getting academic buy-in to be able to really ensure that across the piece, colleagues have a sense of what's in this for them, how can it help their own careers, how is it going to be really beneficial to their students, because ultimately on the academic side, academics just want to know that what they're doing is going to really help their students, because they're so passionate about excellence in education and making sure that these things set up their students for the careers ahead. So getting that buy-in is always a challenge. It takes a lot of work to bring people along with you.
And just to jump in there then by its nature though as well, what you're saying here is that you've got to do that, but you've got to do that in multiple locations as well.
Exactly.
Because if you've got something that's a dialogue, you can have all the buy-in in the world in where you are, but you need it with the way you've got the dialogue too, don't you? And I suppose therefore then an additional, it's not a challenge because it adds a richness, but then you've got different cultures, different values, different ways of acknowledging how one can access education. I mean, what happens with countries and cultures and areas where there's still, despite the fact that we all pivoted a few years ago when it was COVID, still a suspicion around online learning? I mean, how does that come into the mix too?
Yeah, I mean, I think partly why we're so grateful that the British Council have this Going Global Partnerships Fund, not just because it's great to have the money, which can help to do a little bit of the physical taking of the academics organising these projects to go to each place so they can really do that the getting to know you part of the labour that's so important to make these things sing. Build that trust and make sure that everybody is understanding each other's point of view, being on the same page, the context of learning and all of those kinds of things. But also I think that that kind of that funding of that sort also just it helps legitimize these kinds of practices within the sector, and that's just so important. So the sector voice, I'm part of the steering committee for the internationalisation at home working group as part of Universities UK International with Anthony Manning and colleagues, and very much value the work that's done within the sector to really push the value of these kinds of internationalisation at home opportunities for students and the importance of it. And the document that was produced around is the UK building global mindsets, and all of those kinds of bits of sector produced research and background documents are exactly what I need to bring up and to have in my hands to make sure that colleagues are really aware that this kind of practice is sector wide, it's important, it's necessary, and that if we're going to help the next generation of students to move away from island mentality, shall we say, that we really need to desperately build this global thinking into everything that we do. So I think that part of the learning, if I was going to put the learning of my doctoral research or research that I have done since, of course, it's great to be together when you can, being together in the same space is fantastic, but we don't all have the opportunity to be in the same space, to get to know each other and to have dialogues. I mean, here we are, the three of us, meeting online because, I certainly didn't have the opportunity today to get on a plane and go to Dubai and be in the same room as Chris to have this conversation. And, the world has made such things a bit fragile sometimes. So be together when you can, but utilize these kinds of technologies when you can't. And if you can only ever have dialogues with people that you can be in the same room with, well, that's a very small and narrow echo chamber of a conversation.
Yeah. I was interesting because we've had a lot of conversations with colleagues recently across the sector about the limitations within T&E that should be opportunities when we're talking about the digital online space. And because it's because of regulatory frameworks, but just the potential that's there within, that already exists in micro-credentialing or exists in professional development or exists in COIL elements, which are non-credit bearing, but are, hugely collaborative in nature. I mean, they can be credit bearing, but they don't have to be successful and valuable. And it's what's interesting is to see the way in which activity particularly like COIL projects are chipping away at this sort of barrier. As Judith said, we all had it during COVID. We pivoted away from it. Some of us are pivoting back or whatever the term would be, and kind of expanding that. And it has tremendous potential when you look at the internationalization at home, because you can say, well, we're bringing outsiders into our classroom and therefore strengthening. And it's like, yeah, but there's the second half of that conversation that, and it's becoming more and more interesting to see how research-led, project-based activity is flipping the way around. So those used to be kind of the the back end effect of T&E partnerships, that maybe we'd get research in 10, 20 years time. That would of course be the goal once we built an infrastructure. And now it's a case of, no, let's start with this type of stuff and then accidentally fall into a T&E teaching partnership, which is, it's very bizarre, but very positive, I think. I've got colleagues that work in Hong Kong that do tremendous amount of stuff in COIL, and same thing. It's kind of just led to quietly, because you've had academic buy-in. You've had academics, as you say, understand. Oh, there's value. Oh, you mean we could do that as? Oh, and we could do, and we could, yeah. And it's I'm enjoying this phase of evolution. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think for academics, as you say, you need that buy-in, but I think there's two layers of that. And, this is all part of the challenge and the strategic work that I do, how you build these frameworks for all of these things to then just magically fall into place. And part of that is academics really seeing the incredible value for their students, what this can do to the student learning experience, to enhancing, the kind of ideas or, projects that they're focused on in the curriculum. But I think the other dimension of it, and this is what we're really trying to build here, is opportunities for professional development, for scholarship around these kinds of ways of working. And, I think, many universities now have different kinds of, routes to promotion. At Manchester Met, we have these two different routes around people who are focused more on research, but we have another route that we call education, practice and citizenship. So, a route more on the education side. And so, we're really trying to build this culture of pedagogical scholarship and really see that this kind of globally engaged thinking and activity is such a rich space for colleagues to be able to work in and, be part of global dialogues around this kind of education practice. And also, for me, this is how I became a principal fellow of HEA. It was through these kinds of ways of working and being able to lead on this that's it's led to, it can lead to all sorts of opportunities for colleagues. And I think they're starting to really see that.
And and that framework is what's going to sustain it, right? Because too often T&E is, one-to-one. I met you, we met each. Let's just build this, and then it and yes, over time it can evolve. But we should have learned from how T&E evolved to now be able to say, let's build this framework, and even if it's done by stealth, it doesn't matter. Let's put it in place and build those. Because the knock-on effects for, as you say, scholarship, and then you start to raise the profile of Indigenous learning methodology and voices. You talk about integration and interaction, collaboration. You talk about capacity building. You talk about just recognition of voices. So one of the things that I see a lot with my PhD students in Dubai is, because it's still an emerging research culture, and therefore there isn't as much research published as there would be in an English-speaking Western nation, for example. The perception then becomes, well, we don't do research here and our research isn't as valuable. And you think, it doesn't mean that people aren't doing research. It just means that the research isn't being given a megaphone. And so therefore, the more we can amplify the research that's being done that is relevant to context, the more I think we address that let's not get carried away. We're not going to address it anytime quickly, but the more we can, support the growth of that. And it's just interesting. Like, it's just fun and interesting to learn this stuff from other people. It's universities are safe places to work, as you said, at the beginning. They're kind of things that a lot of us fall into, but we are in them largely because they're interesting. Like, we get to do interesting stuff and learn kind of on a daily. We have a lot of committee meetings, sure, which are the opposite of fun usually, but yeah, there's opportunity there to learn too. Yeah.
I think also the fascinating thing, and the thing that we need to work out how we manage this at universities and colleges is the notion of impact, and how when we're looking at some of these things, it isn't something that you can do this, you can produce this, and then 2 months later you can write about what the 100% impact of something has been. It's not like that, is it? It's something very often where you can see there's an indication of what's going to happen, but you actually don't know, until a significant time probably in the future. And I suppose that is then when, if you don't have a huge body of research behind it. You can't, you've got to have a little bit of faith that there's going to be that direction of travel. And we probably just need to realize, don't we, that there'll be some things where we can have short-term measures and fixes for things that we can quantify and things that we can deal with there and then. There'll be other things that are medium term, and there'll be other things that are long term. And no one of those is any better than any other, just because you can measure something really quickly and immediately and, oh great, I've maybe on my measure for an international strategy, for example, at an institution, it's how many students you got coming in the door that week. It's, yes, you can measure that, and yes, it's there, but that is no more valid than how a student might graduate, where they might go after they've graduated, what kind of impact there might be there. It's just having an awareness, isn't it, that there's a suite of these things, and we need to look at this. I think the great thing though, Rachelle, as well, is with the new research that you are doing, that you're also will be, I would imagine, looking at, you've had your relationship with the British University in Egypt for some time, haven't you?
We have, yeah.
So you'll be also building on things that have taken place for some time. So you'll be able to bring that into the equation as well, and I think when people start to see that, to see some of that kind of evidence, that will make the message even more powerful for those that will no doubt find it fascinating as well.
Yes, and our approach to COIL has also been about well, I think like anything, it's about having the right people in the team, isn't it? Who bring the right mix of things to the table. And this is what I just love about having the elbow room within such a big and interdisciplinary, context of arts and humanities. That there's so many different people with different skill sets, different things they bring to the table. So, the COIL agenda in our faculty have been really leading with my colleague Rachel Kelly, who's from design. She's currently undertaking an EdD, a doctorate in education, really focused on ethical approaches to COIL. So, the literature, the ideas, the sensibility around, ethical ways of working that she brings into our thinking is really valuable. And then the other colleague that we're working with on this is Benedict Brahik from our School of Sociology and Criminology. And, from her background, she has a wonderful set of resources that she brings to the table around methods of evaluation, different ways in which we can capture outcomes and learning. And so she's put together, a set of resources around that as part of the COIL toolkit that we've put together for colleagues. And the three of us put together a paper. Our little twist on impact was to do Project Impact with students and colleagues. So this idea of working impact. So we've had lots of fun thinking through, ways of working and, how we want to do it our way in arts and humanities, and have this sort of signature ways of working that we think, it builds on the particular experiences and scholarship and research that has gone on, drawing on what people have actually done in the projects that they've led at Manchester Met.
I think we'll have to start to wrap up now. I think what would be great as well, though, Rachelle, is if you could come back to talk a little bit more about this and maybe pick up a couple of the projects that you have been working on to share that with people. I think would be fascinating as well. And then, of course, as we've mentioned, we're really, delighted if you'll be contributing to our next book, and bringing some of this together, writing a little bit in terms of some background, just in terms of what translocal is as well, etc. But then taking that to where it will look into the next stage would be wonderful. But if you could come back to tell us a little bit about how the projects are developing, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I'm very excited about this potential book project and look forward to talking more. And Yeah, it's great with this British Council project, given that we're just at the start of it. We want to be able to think, do some real thinking and reflection around this, and this idea of translocal education and connecting with communities, how this connects with sustainable development goals, how we're thinking about equity, diversity and inclusion as part of these projects, and building this whole approach to transnational education. What other dimensions we can thinking of for the next iteration of approaches to working this way. So yeah, look forward to talking more.
But what would be really interesting, and this is not to negate the conversation we just had, is if you could come back with a colleague from the British University in Egypt on, and we could actually have we can sit back and see you two have a conversation about that kind of shared learning, because as you say, those two perspectives are always interesting to see together.
It's a deal.
Well, wonderful. Well, and indeed, so one of the first books I guess was involved with was looking at almost exactly this idea, where we had an author from a host country and an author from a sender country in terms of transnational education, talking about the way that education was seen from the sending perspective and the receiving perspective. And there was largely around the kind of post-colonial engagement, so where the traditional kind of and those were really interesting, just because they're often, as you'd expect, very, very different when looked at from a different lens. But yeah, really, really fascinating.
Absolutely. Yeah, all the things that we're very excited to unpack and nitpick at.
Well, we look forward to that then. Yes. And thank you very much for coming back. Yeah, strange. Again, as odd as that is, but it's been a wonderful second conversation.
I mean, a very different conversation, I think, than we had the first time. So I mean, a great opportunity really to talk a bit more about these current projects and what we're doing now. And I think it sets my mind on fire. And I'm also looking forward to being able to write about some of this stuff and work more in collaboration with both of you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, and we look forward to that in due course.
Thank you, guys. Thanks so much.